I'm Brent Glass, Executive Director of the Sing Sing Prison Museum. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's program. The Sing Sing Prison Museum's mission is to tell the story of 200 years of incarceration, the complex and compelling story of Sing Sing prison. And it's also our mission to challenge all of us to imagine a more equitable system of criminal justice in America, something that's very timely and it's been in the news this week especially, and it's on everyone's mind, and to also take action to build a better society. And we're doing this in several ways. First, we're actually building a museum adjacent to Sing Sing Correctional Facility in Ossining, New York. We're taking the former prison powerhouse and renovating it as the headquarters for our museum. We're doing this, we hope to start construction later this year with the support of funding from New York State and from other public and private sources. We're also fortunate to have received a challenge grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and we need to raise about $1.1 million to match that grant. But those federal funds and state funds are going to enable us to begin the work to construct our museum. We're also sponsoring programs such as the online series Justice Talks, where we're exploring a wide range of topics, including history and contemporary issues. And all those programs are posted on our website, singsingprisonmuseum.org, as well as information about the NEH Challenge Grant and all of our, the history of Sing Sing and all of the various programs that we've been sponsoring. We're fortunate that we have a very active and engaged board of trustees who manage our programs and help us raise money. And I do want to thank our board and also our wonderful staff at the museum who are pushing ahead with a very ambitious agenda that I think will pay off in educating people and inspiring people to take action and to be informed on how they can take action to build a better society. Tonight's program is being offered as part of National Poetry Month, and I'm delighted to introduce our moderator, Jane Friedman, a renowned leader and innovator in the publishing industry. Jane served as president and CEO of HarperCollinsPublishers worldwide from 1997 until 2008. And then she co-founded and became CEO of Open Road Integrated Media, a digital publishing and marketing company. Prior to HarperCollins, Jane was executive vice president of Random House and the Knopf Publishing Group, where she is credited for creating the Author's Tour. She was also publisher of Vintage Books and president of Random House Audio Publishing, the first audiobooks division of a publishing house. Jane is a great friend of the Sing Sing Prison Museum, and I'm delighted to introduce her tonight.
Thank you, Brent, and a great friend of Brent Glass's. I am so pleased to moderate this program tonight, and I really am not going to moderate much. I'm going to listen as much as we all should listen to these wonderful poets. But poetry has been near and dear to my heart for my 5 decades as a publisher. And even before then, I was interested in poetry as a child. But 3 years ago, I visited the Sing Sing Prison Museum project under development that Brent has talked about. And I became an immediate supporter and am a supporter of the museum's missions and goals. The need for a museum like this is more important now than ever. We must recognize the amazing history of Sing Sing, and what an amazing history it is. And we must also have a place to consider serious issues regarding criminal justice reform. So tonight's program is a good example of how the arts and humanities can be a gateway to greater understanding of these issues. For me, poetry is intimate and personal, and also invites us to think in new ways about familiar subjects. I have been known to say that books are civilization, and poems and books of poetry are certainly a major part of the mix. I'm going to introduce the three speakers we will have tonight, and I do want to mention that there will be time for questions and conversation at the end of this session, and I hope you will all ask questions of any of us. So the first speaker is Victoria Gonzalez, who is going to read a poem by Walt Whitman about an event at Sing Sing prison. It is always good to include Whitman in any poetry reading program. Victoria is a journalist and public historian and serves as communications director for the Sing Sing Prison Museum. She is also producer of the museum's Justice Talks webinars, including tonight's programs. And you should really check out the website to see what webinars are coming, because they're professional and practical and personal and all good things. I'm going to actually introduce the two poets as well now, and then go back to Victoria. Our second panelist is Quincy Troupe. He is a poet, performer, professor, editor, and biographer. In other words, he is everything. It's very special to have him here. He has published 10 books of poetry, including Snakeback Solos, Selected Poems 1969 through 1977, that received the American Book Award. He is also the co-author with Miles Davis of Miles, the Autobiography, 1989, which received an American Book Award, and Miles and Me, a memoir of Miles Davis, in 2000. In 1991, he received the Peabody Award for co-producing and writing the radio show, The Miles Davis Radio Project. We were talking a little bit before we started this program, and I was trying to recall whether or not we had ever met. We think we have, but we are delighted to be united at first or again, and that is Quincy. Our third speaker, who is a friend of many years, is Carol Muske-Dukes. She is a professor of English and creative writing at the University of Southern California, and a former Poet Laureate of California, a wonderful honor. She is also the author of 9 books of poems, including Sparrow, which was a National Book Award finalist. And her most recent book, Blue Rose, was a Pulitzer Prize finalist. She has also published 4 novels, 2 collections of essays, an anthology of poems, and 2 children's poetry handbooks. Again, a woman who has done so much. Her interview, by the way, with John Cheever at Sing Sing, that was in the New Yorker sometimes back, can be found in your chat. And I think you might all like to read after the fact. So it's important to note that Carol and Quincy conducted writing workshops together at the women's prison at Rikers Island as part of what actually it is called the Women's House of Detention at Rikers Island, as part of a program called Art Without Walls, Free Space. You will have an opportunity to discuss this work and their poetry in the question and answer session following the readings. Please place your questions in the chat at the bottom of your screen. And thank you for listening to me. And now our program begins with Victoria Gonzalez.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. We wanted to open this program with a poem from Sing Sing Prison's history and share a small bit of that story. Walt Whitman is seen as one of North America's most influential poets, and he was from New York. Walt Whitman became a frequent visitor to Sing Sing prison in Ossining, where he would occasionally help incarcerated men write letters. So this poem, The Singer in Prison, was written in 1869 and was inspired by a concert Whitman attended at the prison. You can find this in his collection of poems titled Leaves of Grass. This poem tells the story of a female singer's performance and the inspiration she gives to the people imprisoned at Sing Sing. When she sings, everyone is caught up in her words and they feel the emotions. This work weaves her song lyrics along the details of the event and what the incarcerated men might have been feeling. Oh, sight of pity, shame, and dole. Oh, fearful thought, a convict soul. Rang the refrain along the hall, the prison rose to the roof, the vaults of heaven above, pouring in floods of melody in tones so pensive, sweet, and strong, the like whereof was never heard, reaching the far-off sentry and the armed guards, who ceased their pacing, making the hearers' pulses stop for ecstasy and awe. The sun was low in the west one winter day, when down a narrow aisle amid the thieves and outlaws of the land, there by the hundreds seated, sear-faced murderers, wily counterfeiters, gathered to Sunday church in prison walls. The keepers round, plenteous, well-armed, watching with vigilant eyes. Calmly a lady walked, holding a little innocent child by either hand, whom, seating on their stools beside her on the platform, she, first preluding with the instrument a low and musical prelude, in voice surpassing all, sang forth a quaint old hymn. A soul confined by bars and bands cries, help, oh help, and wrings her hands, blinded her eyes, bleeding her breast, nor pardon finds, nor balm of rest. Ceaseless she paces to and fro, oh heartsick days, oh nights of woe, nor hand of friend, nor loving face, nor favor comes, nor word of grace. It was not that I sinned the sin, the ruthless body dragged me in. Through long I strove courageously, the body was too much for me. Dear prisoned soul, bear up a space, for soon or late the certain grace to set thee free and bear thee home, the heavenly pardoner, death, shall come. Convict no more, nor shame, nor dole, depart, a God-enfranchised soul. The singer ceased. One glance swept from her clear, calm eyes o'er all those upturned faces, strange sea of prison faces, 1,000 varied, crafty, brutal, seamed, and beauteous faces. Then rising, passing back along the narrow aisle between them, while her gown touched them rustling in silence, she vanished with her children in the dusk. While upon all convicts and armed keepers they stirred, convict forgetting prisoner, keeper his loaded pistol, a hush and pause fell down a wondrous minute, with deep, half-stifled sobs and sound of bad men bowed and moved to weeping, and youth's convulsive breathings, memories of home, the mother's voice in lullaby, the sister's care, the happy childhood, the long-pent spirit roused to reminisce. A wondrous minute then, but after in the solitary night, to many, many there, years after, even in the hour of death, the sad refrain, the tune, the voice, the words, resumed. The large, calm lady walks the narrow aisle, the wailing melody again, the singer in the prison sings. Oh, sight of pity, shame, and dole. Oh, fearful thought, a convict soul. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to introduce Quincy Troupe. One moment while we unmute Quincy.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
An Art of Lost Faith. For Robert Ferris Thompson, Maya Deren, and Ishmael Reed. 1, beginnings. And I'm going to read the first part, but it's a long poem. In a place beyond our knowing, silence reigns, darkness perhaps. Some light echoes in this vast space. Perhaps it is another world, an ether world of maybe. If spirits among us know what it is, they have never spoken. Perhaps shadows have, over underground in some invisible space surrounded by air, water, where spirits of creation exist, swimming or zooming outside our comprehension. A place where only imagination through prayer can take us to a road, perhaps. A passageway stretching long and far, deep into the past. Perhaps it is a doorway leading to nowhere. Nobody knows, only silence knows the language echoes speak. In this vast place beyond knowing, are bones, teeth, hair, rib cages, skulls, toes, fingers here? Are maggots here too? Do they speak some kind of music in this beyond world? Do they understand silence, the twilight world of myth, memory of earth, water, sky, wind, the memory of fire, earthquakes, thunder, the memory of storms, lightning, ice, the memory of creation, birth, death, the memory of everything here and gone, everywhere. A mystery is what we know is certain, an idea of something without shape or form, pulsating with what we know is power. It is a metaphysical presence, a blessing with what we know is the ability to heal and destroy this place, this space we live in, only by its invitation, sanction, only by its blessing. This place we've been born into, this place we are here with. So much amnesia. When time was young. In the beginning, no one knew what the beginning was. What force act when mad genius pulled the trigger? Shooting time into space was a commencement, an inauguration. All of this was in fact true, was an installation, a swearing in drama, and time in the opening act was perhaps dressed up as a bird, was all in feathers and flew where nobody had a clue. Though all unheard voices from then say it became a silent language when anything open tried to breathe, attempting to speak. A blue cloud whispered a pulse of hushed utterance, slipped out, became a newfangled mode of communication. Only circling hawks understood the frequency of before time did a boogie woogie shuffle, folded its wings, dove back down into the dazzling hole it flew out of in the first place, as a breeze-licked petal trembled, as though it was an unmanned boat floating on still waters of a lake somewhere hidden under the sun. Las Cruces, New Mexico. You have come to this space of light and pure beauty, from the love song tongues of ancestors singing. You have risen from an earth soaked in human blood, animal blood, bird blood, fish blood, slicking polluted water. Singing the gospel, you have bloomed like a desert flower under the cross of crucifixion. Your pain deep as poetry, river deep, pure as love flowing back to Jordan. Blood holy from Africa, you have come unreborn to us here with the spirit of healing. You cleanse us now, baptize us in clear water. In clear water. You have kept the faith with your body, holy, your holy gods, with Jesus, with Malcolm, with Martin Luther King, and every man. And you have come wearing the mantle of Adam, your own sermon on the mount in your own throat. O gentle native man, luminous with tenderness. Your commitment, your faith in love is so very holy, beautiful, as the spirit of ancestors tonguing through your blood. Their pain veining river deep through your gospel of holy feathers, your sacred text of healing, deep singing in your sacred mountains, your sermons bringing us here to this clear sweetness of place, to this space, this moment where you are light and beauty. Your words, drum scripts, we hear, we see in your dance steps, carried in hearts throughout the world where you live. Song of some bloodthirsty men. Time is a bald eagle, a killer soaring high in the blue. Music to men dodging bullets in speeding cars. New death, hope it never come. Many people hear fools blow their own refrain of dues, scream through loud voices in crowded seedy bars. Time is a bald eagle, a killer soaring high in the blue. History is chock full of leaders, poets who write clues, full of abuses snatched from the eyes of mad drunken czars who knew death yet hoped it never come. Bloodthirsty men sanctioned death, beating kettle drums with bones praising killing wars. Time is a bald eagle, a killer soaring high in the blue. Tsar Pinochet blew his gasket reading the news, a mocking poem by Neruda of his idiocy stuck in tar, who knew death, yet hoped it never come. Death waits for no one, comes with each rising sun, found Idi Amin looking at severed heads in mason jars. Time is a bald eagle, a killer soaring high in the blue, who knew death yet hoped it never come. Storms are passing through the heart of America. A howling snowstorm is passing through the heart of America. It is ripping down trees, piling up high on concrete streets, covering sidewalks covered with feces, garbage poisoning the air we all breathe. Our faces are covered with painted, elaborate masks. Some eyes dart arrows around anxious with fear, size up everything coming their way. Now always suspect, sometimes even friends. These storms sometimes incubate in minds of people we know, some called friends who might live next door in prisons they have created themselves when they lock their minds up in pods, where news sweeps grow like snowstorms full of strange beliefs, locked into place in this atmosphere of bizarre propaganda. Howling white snowstorms of disinformation rage everywhere. So, what to do inside these melancholy suburban pods suspended in time when there are few live music bands here to relieve us? Where is the great band weather report when we need their release, where the art shows buzzing live conversations, the poetry readings, live dance shows, live anything. So what to do then is the question we ask when a howling snowstorm freezes heartland America. What to do then when time is an hourglass running out of sands? The hours fly quick on wings of clipped winds, like nonsense blown from mouths of hot air. People, including my own, form syllables, suds, words shot through pursed lips like greased sleeves, and bloom inside all these rooms dominated by television, babble, sleuzing idiot images invented in modern test tubes, clones blinking, slathering all over controlled airwaves of an up for sale world, blinking a paucity of spirit. So dance, you leering ventriloquists, marionettes, you greedy counterfeits, dance, dance, dance. In the bottomless power, magic of Duende, climbing stealthily from earth, wrapped inside secrets, mystery infused in black magic, enters bodies in the form of dance, music, art, imbuing language with sovereignty, in blood spooling back through violent centuries, voices echoing ancient Africa, rise, thread from skins of blessed sacred rituals. People emerge from drums as heartbeats in time, memories revive here now through metaphor. Old voices find their way vibrating into song, rhythms stitch forgotten sounds into language, beat out of them by whips on slave ships, bring back wonder of feet pounding dance, 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 the Holy Ghost lost in bloody homelands. Now souls underneath rise up through bodies, spool back with talismans, hypnotic, pull ancient voodoo up in buckets filled with holy water, evoke memories drinking from whodunit secrets, awaken in the voice of Garcia Lorca, Andalusian dews heard in Miles's clues, vibrating anew in sketches of Spain and Dante blues. Dance, dance, now I say dance, 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 dance now. I say dance. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Hi, everyone. I want to say thank you. First of all, thank you for that reading, Quincy. Really extraordinary. Thank you to the Sing Sing Prison Museum and its board for this invitation to read during National Poetry Month. And thanks to Brent Glass and Victoria and Nicole and the other organizers. Also to Jane Friedman for her lovely introductions. And special thanks to my very old friend, Quincy Troupe, who, as Jane mentioned, first joined me at Rikers Island at the Women's House of Detention. Actually, it was called officially called the New York Correctional Institution for Women. In fact, here's my pass. I still have, sorry, this is not show and tell, but that person there is actually me 100 years ago. We founded their Art Without Walls Free Space, which was a program that was writing workshops in the beginning. As I mentioned, Quincy taught a poetry workshop, I taught one, and then others joined us, Mae Jackson and many other poets and fiction writers and then playwrights. And the program expanded throughout New York State and became, actually, there was a brief program at Sing Sing as well. Jane mentioned John Cheever, who visited and read his work. His novel Falconer had just come out. I wrote about it. I introduced him at that reading. When the program went statewide, it was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowments for the Humanities. And I know what it means to fundraise. I want to wish Brent and Jane good luck in their fundraising efforts for the project of the future for the museum. A valid question, I guess I should answer at the outset, is what would a young, now old white woman be doing teaching poetry in the prisons? But there's a childhood answer that has to do with driving by with my father as a very young child, Stillwater Prison, a maximum security prison in Minnesota, where I'm from. I was born in St. Paul, and being shocked by the fortress-like and dungeon-like aspect of the prison as it appeared to me as a child, and my father telling me what a prison was. But the shorter answer is Attica in 1971, I guess. I had just come to New York City from California in graduate school, and I was about to live in New York City for many years. I was changed from what I forever from what I heard on WBAI, a radio station that may still exist in New York City. I think it does. The broadcast about Attica, whereas some of you may remember was a standoff and then a massacre of the inmates from above when guards stood and shot down with bullets outlawed by the Geneva Conventions into D Yard, which is where the inmates were assembled. Tom Wicker wrote about this extensively in the New York Times. I wanted to do something in my own hopeless little way about prisons, or I wanted to learn more about them. I joined something called the Women's Bail Fund, a very social action organization. They actually just simply bailed women out of jail. And the requirements were something like, as I recall, illness, pregnancy, age, and certainly children, because women in prison are always separated from their children, of course, and often the children are lost to foster care. They become guardians are guarded by the state. They become charges of the state. So there were many reasons to bail women out of prison, and many women were in prison, especially at a house of detention, which means that these women were detained without bail, sometimes for up to a year without seeing a judge, for crimes, what we tend to call victimless crimes, prostitution, shoplifting, drugs. So the bail fund was very effective, however, in its way. However, I was the only member, it seemed to me at the time, very few of us. I think I remember going alone. I know I went alone out to Rikers Island, to the Rock, as it was called, to present the bail money we had raised and to pay for women's release. I ended up getting inside the prison because my then husband, who was a young doctor at Columbia Presbyterian, worked in a clinic at the men's house and helped me get a pass. Oh, that's the pass I showed you, sorry. And I went out alone to the Rock. As I said, I would get on the Hazen Street bus at Bloomingdale's, of all things. And while he worked in a clinic at the men's house, he managed to get me into a program called Aftercare at the women's house, where those of us who were in aftercare were involved in the job of supposedly helping people get jobs, which was, as I said, pretty hopeless task. But I then managed to get permission to teach a poetry class on Friday nights from the then warden of the women's house, and ended up then asking her, when that was successful, if we could start other workshops. And that's how it began. I will read a couple of the poems by women in that workshop and give them and name them for credit from many years ago, obviously. But first, I'll read a very brief passage of my own work from a novel of mine called Channeling Mark Twain. Mark Twain has fallen into some controversy these days, but this is my third, I think it's my third novel, fictionalized account of a young woman who learns how to teach, really. Even though I was teaching, it is roughly autobiographical. I was teaching at Columbia in the graduate program at that time, and also at the New School. I learned more about teaching at the Women's House of Detention, teaching inmates, learned more about teaching and social justice and poetry itself. So I'm going to read just a little passage, brief passage from this novel, Channeling Mark Twain. It was published by Random House. I can't remember, I think 2003. I put down my copy of Good Times by Lucille Clifton that I just passed around and read aloud. The workshop had been going pretty well. It was the second Friday night we'd met. Was it because things had been going smoothly that I blew it, that I lost my focus? Because I couldn't leave a good thing alone? I knew it wasn't considered proper prison etiquette to ever ask an inmate why she was incarcerated, yet all at once I couldn't stop myself. Officer Alleganth was back in the room, but even her presence didn't hold me back. So the only thing you're locked up for is prostitution, I asked. Alleganth had been sufficiently relaxed to nod off a little, leaning against the wall by the door. I noticed that she opened her eyes at my question and glanced at me, then at Baby Ain't, the name of the inmate I was addressing. I met up with the cop, need his quota, so I come in at Jump Street on a pros collar. But then, because they say drugs involved, I miss to have a date set and I fall off the calendar. Now I'm going to zip to 250 days in prison. She's a detention inmate. She has been charged with no crime at this point. Because the pigs say their courts are backed up, women who come in on a nothing arrest end up without a fascist pig court date listed on the calendar. They rot here innocent, sometimes for years till they rise up, till they won't take it anymore and they tear the walls down, or the system destroys them completely, like Billy D. This information came from Aquila, who as usual had seated herself across the table from me, staring at me in a manner that I sensed was meant to unnerve me. She sometimes smiled a mysterious smile or snorted at something I said. I appeared to amuse her. I now wish I'd never asked the question about Baby Ain't's charge. There were obviously reasons for not inquiring in front of others. Alleganth then speaks to Aquila. Miss Kohler, you've been requested not to proselytize anywhere within institution walls. You having a little lapse in memory? Alleganth, the guard, was standing up very straight now, her chin jutting forward, in charge. Aquila half closed her gamine light eyes and peered out from beneath her long lashes. Darlene kept spinning her wheel, her voice barely audible. Jesus, Jesus. Screw, I believe you the one having a memory lapse. Kohler was my slave name. It's Aquila Malik now. It's Islamic by name. Think you can get your au fait mind around that? You got yourself a civil service job out here, monkeyed up in a uniform oppressing your own, while the white man pull your strings from downtown. You sure seem to enjoy appearing before the disciplinary board, Kohler. I can set that up for you again right now. Alleganth stepped forward, her keys clinking. Aquila slowly pushed back her chair, starting to get up, her eyes still amused. I looked over at Darlene. Her praying had become white noise, I realized. I'd finally stopped hearing it, like the planes overhead from LaGuardia. Aquila stood up. So now I'm going to take the liberty of reading just a couple. This is actually the one remaining copy of a small anthology I put together with another teacher, Gail Rosenblum, called Songs from a Free Space. And it's writings by women in prison, very small. I believe the National Endowment for the Arts funded it. But as I said, this is the only precious copy left. So I will read, I'm going to read the lighter poems, or what will seem somewhat lighter than what I just read. This is the first one is by Fannie James Rogers, called Lady. Hard rain washes my tears as I walk in the night, 2 years doing my sidewalk act. And around that corner stand the man I peddle my body for, tell that lie for, just to keep around. Hey, just to keep around. And this is a poem by Carol Raymer called Astrology Hype. While in prison 6 months, my horoscope predicted travel to exciting places, new career opportunities, romance and adventure. So far, I've traveled from jail to Manhattan Supreme Court. My pay scale has increased from 10 to 25 cents per hour. Numerous other inmates have made overtly sexual advances to me in vacant stairwells. Honey, it's not my idea of a rising sign. Maybe that's somewhat funny. I'm just going to read. There are longer ones here, but I think I'll just read one more. This is called Alone by Deborah Hiller. She who walks alone and dreams will remain lonely. She who sleeps with her pillow only dreams of her pillow as partner. But she who sits in her cell and writes will master this world. And then I'll read one poem by me from a book of mine, a book of poems of mine called Twin Cities. I mentioned I was from St. Paul, Minnesota, the other city being Minneapolis. We've heard a lot about Minneapolis recently, as Brent mentioned. And questions of social justice that certainly are on everyone's minds. This is called Addicts. If you maybe are getting the idea that I'm one note here, I don't mean to be. I do write other kinds of poems, but this is a poem. Well, I shouldn't have to explain it, but it's a kind of satirical poem about how we think of addiction. Monsters, all of them, the ones who gave one life, the ones who take life back, the big bloodbath, family romance and hot woe, the mom who shoots up, the dad who flashes, sex fiends, hand-cranked, snakes in the grass, uncles, aunts, boys and girls, gay and straight, rocketing up and down the 12 steps to confront the big, mocked, sad as shit self, mirrored in the Times by the departments of war and good works, breathing life back into those we need to kill to restore peace. There will be heaven-sent ideologies, every religion tweaked and sold like crystal meth. In the heart, in the vein, what passes for populism is set forth by the guy on the internet who wants to be eaten alive. Buddy, we all want to be eaten alive. Isn't that finally it? You, me, a bottle of Chateau Yquem, some techno loot, Catullus's words piped in just to keep us honest. And then the Donner Party all over again, but by choice this time. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Quincy. Jane, do you have
I
some
bas-
questions?
I basically just was blown away by the readings of both of these wonderful poets, and I wanted to thank them for what they bring to the world and what they bring to us right tonight. I believe that there are some questions. I don't think I can read them from my screen.
I could read them.
Shall we take some questions?
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to ask, there's a question here for Quincy. What has inspired your poetry?
Well, how can I say this? I always like to read and read books because my mother always had books around the house where I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. And she always had books around the house. But I never thought I would be a writer. I just didn't think about that. That wasn't something that I thought about. I was a basketball player. I was a really good basketball player. And I had all these scholarships, and I went to college on a basketball scholarship. I went to Grambling College to play basketball. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got kicked out of Grambling for beating up people because, St. Louis is a very violent place. It's a very violent place. And so when people would, the football players especially, they would say something stupid and threaten me, And but I was a boxing champion too. So I just beat them up, I would just beat them up. I would just beat them up immediately. And that, finally I got kicked out of Ground. And make a long story short, I got kicked out for beating up a bunch of people. And and I went in the army. And my mother told me, you can't come back here. You got to go in the army and learn and get yourself together. So I went in the army and played basketball on the all-army basketball team and traveled all over Europe and South and North Africa and all of that, and came back to St. Louis. Didn't want to stay there and moved to California and went back to school. And that's the long and story. So I started writing in Europe. And I remember all my friends used to think I was a sissy because I didn't know anybody, no poets. I didn't know any poets. So they said, what do you write? I said, I'm writing poetry. They said, oh man, that's for sissies. And it was just weird, but that's what I was doing. I was writing poetry and loved it. But at the time, I didn't care what they thought, because they couldn't beat me up, And so I really didn't care, And finally in California, I started to get some recognition. I started to publish. And I'll say one other thing. The man the publisher of New Directions, I can't think, I'm forgetting his name now. He started New Directions, and he loved my poetry. And he really loved my poetry. And he published 6 or 7 or 8 of them in New Directions 22. And it was kind of like a miracle, and then people in California inviting me to read and all that. So that's how, in a short way. And my mother, who loved writing, and she had books. But when I told her I wanted to be a poet, she wanted me to be a lawyer, which I didn't want to be. And she wanted me to be a lawyer. I could have gone to law school, but I didn't want to be a lawyer. So she got really mad with me when I told her I was going to be a poet, even though she introduced me to poetry and writing. She wanted me to be a lawyer. So that's how I got into writing. And I read books all the time. So.
Well, there's another question in the chat for either one of you. Maybe we'll ask Carol first. And how does poetry, in your opinion, help us better understand these issues of social justice that we're still talking about today? And by the way, I want to mention that we will be having a special edition of Justice Talks in July with Heather Ann Thompson, who wrote the amazing book about the Attica uprising. So I'm happy that you mentioned that, but she is going to be our featured speaker in our July program. But how does poetry, in your opinion, Carol and Quincy, I'd like to hear you both on this, help us better understand these complex issues of social justice, and especially as it relates to incarceration?
Can I just say, Quincy, my mom was very important in why I became a poet too. And she also had books, and oh my God, she knew pages and pages and pages of poems by heart. And she used to drive everybody else in the family crazy, especially my dad. She would recite, endlessly poetry. And I was the one who listened. And I feel like I grew up in this ocean of words. She wanted to be a poet, I think, and secretly, and I just became, I think my love of poetry really came from that amazing maternal voice, I remember her pushing me on a swing reciting, how would you like to go up in a swing? Up in the air is so blue. Oh, I do think it's the pleasantest thing that ever a child can do. Robert Louis Stevenson. I think if what your mom wants stays with you forever, as you kind of pointed out. And even though I think I never thought I'd be a poet either, I started kind of early because of my mom. As far as social justice goes, I don't think it's hard to say, apart from social justice itself and each person striving for a way to realize that. I'm not sure poetry itself can answer that question. Maybe Quincy feels differently, but I think that some chord has to be struck in you as an individual and as a poet. I mentioned my father, on the other hand, and us driving by Stillwater Prison when I was a little girl, and looking at this massive, massive edifice, you know, it was like a frozen gray wave wall, you know, with guard towers at the top and searchlights and, you know, a concertina wire. And I said to my father, what is that? And he said, that's where people go when they've committed crimes, and they stay there. And I couldn't think of anything worse than having one's individual freedom taken away. Even as a tiny child, prison seemed to me a kind of death, and a death that was ongoing. And my father, who loved to sing when he drove, he was a businessman, but he had a very good voice, and he sang, "If I had the wings of an angel, over these prison walls I would fly. I'd fly straight to the arms of my darling, and there I'd be willing to die." I think that's an old Hank Williams song. I'm not sure, but that song and the poetry of that song stayed with me. And I know it sounds sentimental. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I think that informed my own sense of what you're calling, so what it can be called social justice.
Well, you know, this, because it's a part of mine about writing politically. You know, I grew up and I was in the Watts Writers Workshop in Los Angeles, and I lived in Watts and I was out there with Bud Schulberg started that writers workshop, and I was a part of it. I was a part of the Watts Writers, and most of the poets in that workshop were political. They were really political, you know. And so I came in there with all my little nice poems. I didn't thought about writing political poems, and they would laugh at me. They would laugh at me. I was reading all these poems about the woods, and you know, what I thought poets should be. And they would laugh at me. So I went home and started writing these political poems, you know, because I was involved with SNCC, and I was involved in, I knew all the Black Panthers. So I just switched over and started writing these really political poems, like Burn the Motherfucker Down for Crazy Hope for One More, Malcolm King X, you know what I mean? And then I remember the people in the workshop said, whoa, wait a minute, what happened to that old guy, you know what I mean? And then from that point on, and we would do these readings out there in California. And as Carol was talking about, we started going to prisons, and I'd go in these prisons and in California and read these really crazy poems and violent poems, and all the prisoners would look and say, "Whoa, this guy here is crazy." You know what I mean? I mean, and I was at somebody, and this guy talking about. He said, what did he say? If the guards weren't here, I'd come down there and do you in your booty. So I said, oh, really? I said, really? I said, you come down here and do me and you would? I said, come on down. Come on down, man. Come down now. Come down now. I'll put the guards out so I can whoop you up. And he sat up there and looked at his friends, and he was like, oh shit, this guy is crazy. He is insane. That's what I heard him telling the guy. I said, come on, man, what are you? So I started climbing up the bleachers to get him, you know. You know, I was from a violent place in St. Louis, you know, I really was, you know, and but I was trying to suppress it. You know, I thought I could suppress it through writing and the friends I was having. But when people would say stuff like that to me about me as because I was writing poetry, then the other side would come out. You see what I'm saying? And I decided then that it was a need for some people like me to go into those places, those prisons, And I did for a long time. And as Carol knows, anytime anybody would ask me to come in, I'd go in and talk to the prisoners, you know? And I did that for a long time.
You know, Carol, there's a question about your novel channeling Mark Twain. Now, it was published in 2008.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say 2003? I never.
No, that's all right. It was published, though. It was many years after you had. It was based, as you said, on some of your work at Riker's, correct? So
Yeah.
how, after that many years, what was the process of recalling those experiences? That's one of our questions. Did you keep a journal, or did you just rely on your memory?
No, I relied on my memory, just as, Quincy remembers very clearly trying to get at that guy who gave him trouble. I remember, like I said, almost everything. I mean, emotionally charged memories of learning to teach. I really feel I learned to teach in the prisons. You learn how to, as Quincy again said, sort of restrain yourself at the same time as you really offered yourself and what you knew and what you could provide. And then also I learned, poetry from the inmates of the prisons. They knew so much poetry that I didn't know. I needed to be educated in Black poetry. I was reading as much as I thought I could get to, but they told me about much more. They also told me, Quince, about like the dozens. I mean, very funniest things I've ever heard. Like, if you know what the dozens are, it's like, what would you say? It's like, it's like call and response. It's like, your mom is like a doorknob. Everybody take a turn.
That's right. That's right.
You probably know some far more than I know. But it was poetry, and it was so fast. I mean, they were so much faster than any poets, I don't know, call and response, what you might have in conventional poetry. I had never seen anything like that. It was funnier than anything. It was faster than anything. That's why I remember it so well. I mean, it's in my memory as if it happened yesterday. All of the women who were part of that that beginning class, and then the ones throughout, but mostly in teaching poetry and learning poetry. I really learned from them. So yeah, I remember it all.
Who do you read, both of you, in terms of poets? Well, I see Jane, you have a question? You're on mute, Jane. There you go.
Am I off?
Yeah, but you're echoing.
I'm echoing. Let's see if we can try not to echo. Are we still echoing?
Yeah. While she's getting organized, who do you read now? Who do you recommend? Or Quincy, you said you still read a lot of books and poetry. Who's inspiring you these days?
Well, I really love to read Latin American writers. I really love Latin American writers, Garcia Marquez, Pablo Neruda. I go back to them a lot. First, because both, not only are they great writers, and one is a novelist, and one is a novelist who writes like a poet as a novelist, Garcia Marquez, and then Pablo Neruda. But they're also political. They have that political bent, And I feel that I think politics, and I don't write all political poetry, but I think politics has a place in poetry and literature. I think it has a real strong place, and I've always thought that. And so when I discovered them, I just loved it, and I love the Latin American writers, Garcia Lorca. I love Langston Hughes. I love Langston Hughes. I love a lot of writers, American writers. Carolyn's been one of my favorite people for a long time, and I could just go down the list, people I really like. I like Yusef Komunyakaa a lot, as a poet. I mean, we're good friends too, also, so we like his work and all that.
Jane?
Can I try again? Okay, I think can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you can. I just wanted to say that this has been a wonderful event, because we've seen two poets who are similar and totally dissimilar. And we have seen the diversity of poetry and how important poetry has been and will continue to be. And I really am feeling very good about us bringing more poets out. Poetry used to be scary. Poetry used to be looked at as the independent bookstore where you were afraid to ask for a copy of a book if you didn't know the exact title. Poetry was stay away from it. And look at what we've seen tonight. I also have to particularly say that the fact that our two poets' mothers had such influences over them, I think that's a very interesting case in point. And I think if we can talk to some more mothers, we can get some more kids and we can get some more poets out of them. And I just, it's been fascinating to hear this as someone who has worked with poets for 50 years, but it is fascinating.
I think that's a great comment, and I just want to see if Carol can illuminate us on who she's reading, and then we will have some closing remarks.
You know, I read whatever I can get my hands on, but it's interesting that Quincy mentioned Yusuf Kuminyaka, because of course I read Quincy. And, you know, Yusuf's Dien Kai Dao, that book, which is about his experience in Vietnam, I cannot get over those poems. I teach them. I teach Quincy. I teach, you know, other poets, contemporary poets like Diane Seuss and many, many others. I'm very interested in poets who also write about other disciplines, you know, like science and geology, even, you know, that they bring it out. David Baker has a new book that takes into consideration geology and botany and all these languages that become part of poetry. And I love the Latin American poets as Quincy does, but I also love poets from other times. Catullus, the ancient Roman poet, and of course, you know, the Greek poets, Sappho. I love Sappho. I'm sorry, I could go on forever here. You don't want a whole bibliography, but I go to sleep at night with like 4 books on the bed with me, and I'm falling asleep as I'm reading all these different tomes, volumes. So I could go on forever. Sorry.
One thing I do want to say, if I'm unmuted, is that book of poems that you were holding that was falling apart, Carol.
Yes.
Where can someone find that book? And if not, we should talk to our fellow publishers about perhaps bringing this book back to life. And
like
perhaps
I said, it's the only copy left in existence, and we paid for, you know, whoever, just a bunch of the poets paid for it to be published, I believe, or maybe it was the NEA. I think the NEA, so maybe they paid for it. But it's the kind of thing that could be printed and Xerox or, you know, copied online.
Yes, very much so. And I think that's something, it was very important, I think, that you brought this book up to this audience today. So thank you.
You're welcome. I can get you both a copy.
No, we would. I think that's a great idea and a great way to end our program, and with some comments with an idea of doing something more in the future. And I just want to thank Jane Friedman so much for moderating, for Carol, Quincy, for for Victoria for a wonderful reading of the Whitman poem. Not an easy one to read. Also thank Nicole Hamilton, who's behind the scenes. I think Nicole Belderisi is helping us tonight. So in any case, this is a wonderful way to honor National Poetry Month. And let's get together, not wait for another year for Poetry Month to share some of this great work. Thanks so much, and good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
We'll be in touch.